Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast, where myself and my good friend Andrew Ellis will talk about everything that's happening around the world of Buckeyes football recruiting. We're going to do that right now. Andrew, welcome to the show. How are you, pal? Welcome to Tuesday night. Everyone out there, that's when we're recording this. This isn't going to go onto the internet until Thursday morning. So in the event that something crazy happens between now and Thursday, my bad. That's the asterisk. What's new?
Not a whole lot. I'm not sure if you heard, but I decided to get married on an Ohio State football Saturday. So that was a questionable decision. Got to see part of the Penn State game before we said our vows, but here we are, and I'm still alive and ready to talk.
I guess the important thing is, which part of the game did you get to see?
Okay, so the wedding was at 3:30. We got to watch part of it in the parking lot before we had to do our stuff. But the last thing I saw was Travion Henderson's, I think it was like a 7-yard touchdown run or something in the fourth quarter, maybe.
Okay, so you saw the majority of the game ending stuff.
So right before I walked up to get married is when I saw the JT Tuimoloau pick six and all hell broke loose. So yeah, we got to see most of it, but yeah.
Do you think you should have just been walking down the aisle holding your phone and watching YouTube TV on your phone?
I honestly thought about that. We did have a little TV set up in the barn, but unfortunately we had to, my now wife didn't want that to be seated there while the wedding was going on. So
I guess that adds up. For those of you out there questioning Andrew's commitment to being a man, when this wedding was originally planned, that was supposed to be the game against Indiana, correct? It was not the Penn State game on the initial schedule.
3 weeks after we actually booked the venue is when the Big Ten schedule changes were announced. So great timing.
Those sons of guns. Speaking of timing, we're running out of time in the class of 2023, Andrew, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this episode of Talking Stuff talking about the same three guys we've been talking about forever. I feel like in some ways it's intellectually dishonest to continue pounding the drum about Damon Wilson, Keeley, Mateo Uiagalelei. We've talked about him ad nauseum every time we do the show. And honestly, folks, if you wonder, why aren't we doing more of these episodes? There's just not much to talk about in the class of 2023. And so I want to just do a catch up, a rundown of where things are. Some of it with the guys in the current class, some of it with players Ohio State is still recruiting. But generally speaking, this class has been in a very much of a standstill for the last 2 months. And it all started back in September 3rd when Damon Wilson and Keeley made their official visits. And the plan at that point for Damon Wilson was make an official visit, decide soon after. Then it was make an official visit. Okay, now I'm going to make sure I go visit Georgia, and then I'll decide after. Then it was go make an official visit to Georgia, and then it's I'm not really ready. Then let's wait and see if I can make an unofficial visit to Georgia, and then maybe I'll decide after. And now it's, maybe I need to return to Ohio State for the game against Michigan on November 26th, and then focus on a decision. All of that to say, Andrew, whatever these timeline the kids want to make their decision on, they should. I think in some ways, and this is what I'm referencing when I say intellectually dishonest, there isn't anyone that has a real firm grasp on the inner workings of Damon Wilson's decision. We all know what's out in the ether about, major NIL opportunities with Georgia that are being offered, or at least reported, rumored, whatever. We all know, based on the things he's already done, that it seems like he's very interested in Ohio State. But there isn't anyone that has a firm, concrete idea of a date, of a decision, of an absolute on the return to Ohio State. And so, how much can we keep, juicing that grape?
Yeah, and I posted on the Dotting the I's forum the other day when reports came out that maybe that trip to Georgia was going to be it before he announces. But when you're dealing with a kid who doesn't really do the whole recruiting process, doesn't play games, doesn't talk to people a whole lot, it's really just a matter of watching what they do. If he announces a decision here in the next week or whatever, that's probably not great news for Larry Johnson and Ryan Day. But, we've all got that, got the Michigan game circled on our calendar, and we'll see if he makes it back to town for that. But it's really just, people can interview him and stuff like that. And I know there's people have jobs to do. They have to do that. But it's really just all about what happens here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Does he make an announcement, or does he get back to Columbus? I know Luke Montgomery tweeted something here this afternoon about getting him back up for the Michigan game. And now it's just waiting to see if that happens, really.
Yeah, and I don't want to like besmirch anyone doing their job, but in our current situation with us, being up in the Midwest, Damon Wilson is not talking to people generally unless you're talking to him in person. I can't get down there and try to get a read on him, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have information that I don't. I do know for a fact that there is discussion about a return to Ohio State on November 26th, but nothing has been concretely planned. There have been no airplane tickets purchased or anything like that. So until those plane tickets are purchased, it is all going to be up in the air. No one knew he was going to visit Georgia until 3 days before that trip last week, which we talked about first on ohiostate.rivals.com. And now you just have to figure out what really matters, because I'm convinced of one thing with Damon Wilson. Same as I am with Keeley, and I'm not even going to talk about Keeley beyond this sentence in this episode. When they know where they want to go to college, they will announce it, and that's it. So until then, everything else is just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it sticks.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're a fan of college football in general, let alone a teenage football recruit going to watch Georgia play Tennessee, I mean, that's tough for anybody to turn down. And, Kirby Smart's team put on a show the other night. Their defense looked great. Hendon Hooker is really no longer a Heisman candidate as far as I know. And, I mean, you got to see a great game. Now it's just, does he get to see another great game here in a few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, and heck, there was Ohio State's preeminent recruit commitment in the class of 2023 in attendance for that game as Luke Montgomery went down to Athens with his brother Ryan, the class of 2025 quarterback. So there was an opportunity for Luke down at the Georgia game to talk to Damon Wilson, to talk to Caleb Downs, who was there visiting. We'll talk about that in a moment, to talk to Justice Haynes. I mean, this is an opportunity for Ohio State to try to get a feel for where these kids are at. I do want to just veer off real quick because this episode has no structure. Ryan Montgomery in the class of 2025, I mean, he now takes on he has a much different opportunity than he did a week ago because, 2024 now commitment for LSU, Colin Hurley, who was probably, in my opinion, the best quarterback in the class of 2025 that we'd seen in the last 6 months, reclassified and did what all of the kids are doing. He moved into the class of 2024, where Ohio State has a commitment from the number one ranked player in the country in Dylan Raiola. And in doing so, committed to LSU, is now off the recruiting board for the Buckeyes. So Ryan Montgomery finds himself in a pretty unique position where he's seen a lot of schools. He's been down to Clemson. He's been to Tennessee. He's been to, Georgia. These are all schools that are going to be pretty involved as the process goes along. But I think what's interesting is that it seems pretty clear that most programs around the country have not begun to really focus on the class of 2025 at quarterback because there's so much uncertainty with rosters and attrition and who's going to transfer, who's going to reclassify, and all that stuff right now that it just makes no sense to pay that close attention to the 2025 class. Ryan will be back at Ohio State for the Michigan game on November 26th, as you'd expect, but he finds himself now in a different position because I think his opportunities around the country just got better.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to unfold. And I mean, like 2 months ago when we were watching LSU lose to Florida State, I mean, who would have thought that Brian Kelly would have that program now where they're at? I'm not saying they're going to make the playoff or anything, but obviously they've gotten things turned around. I think the bottom line, if you're an Ohio State fan, if you're Ryan Day, if you're Corey Dennis, there's never going to be any concerns with quarterback. We know Dylan Raiola is coming, the number one player in the country for the 2024 class, and it's just going to take time for those 2025 names to start coming off the board or reclassifying and moving up to 2024 like Hurley just did. So, yeah.
I mean, heck, it's not even you don't even know what's happening right now in the class of 2023 around the country. There's still programs recruiting Brock Glenn. There's still, teams trying to flip the Ohio State quarterback commitment. Florida State at the top of that list. Ohio State is not ever going to sit on its heels and say, hey, we got a guy. Let's not look at other people. The Buckeyes are clearly going to keep evaluating 2023 quarterbacks around the country. We're watching right now as there's a lot of uproar in East Lansing that potentially they may be able to flip Dante Moore away from Oregon. Like the class of 2023, and I talked about this a little bit with some guys in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Tuesday morning. Like you're heading into a chaotic month for the majority of the country. we've watched recruiting in the last 2 or 3 weeks before signing day in the last handful of years be very crazy. When you add in NIL, the transfer portal, everything else is going to be collapsing in on the game at one time in these next few weeks. Like these next few weeks are going to be nuts. And so I think it's actually pretty like intelligent of people like Damon Wilson, Keeley, et cetera, to say, hey, I don't need to, why make a decision today if the difference is deciding today or in 4 weeks? Like what difference is there at this juncture?
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. The next 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it's going to be leading up to that early signing period are going to be absolutely nuts. Cause now, I mean, it's always been wild in the past, but now you throw in the NIL stuff. There's going to maybe even be some more coaching changes between now and then. I reckon there will be. And it's just going to be, you got the Ohio State, Michigan game, obviously the Iron Bowl, just two of those biggest games of the season here, late November coming up. And it's just going to be wild. Nothing, absolutely nothing would surprise me over the next 4 to 6 weeks, unless like Luke Montgomery flipped to like Purdue or something like that. So yeah.
Hey, the Boilermakers are a team on the rise, but I know we talk about this chaos and everything that could go wrong for teams around the country. I want to be very clear that as I look at the Ohio State class of 2023, I don't have a wide number of concerns with anyone flipping or ending up elsewhere. I do continue to wonder when like Kay and Lee and Calvin Simpson Hunt will make their way back to Columbus and get a refresh on their recruitment, their commitment just right before signing day. I think it'd be very helpful. Kay and Lee has, he went to a Georgia Tech game. He was at an Auburn game. There's all these things, they got a lot of friends and former teammates who play at these schools. It's not something to worry about in that perspective. Obviously, Brandon Innes and Mark Fletcher, the teammates at American Heritage High School in Fort Lauderdale, they were at Miami this past weekend. There's been a ton of talk for the last 6 months about Miami and what they're trying to do in the NIL space and how aggressively they've gone after Fletcher, how consistently they've tried to push Innes and use him as some sort of lightning rod for kids in South Florida to go back and make the U great again. And I don't think that there's any concern with those guys. And I think it's important to say that Ohio State, because, and this is where we get a little cliche probably, but they recruit different kids. They recruit kids who have different priorities and different focus. And more than ever, it becomes important to do that in a world where the average program is saying, come here and we'll give you X amount of money, or come here and you'll make X amount of money in some cases. There is still a swath of teenagers around the country who says, I need to go get developed. And they're thinking long term, not just short money. So, when you're talking about these potential flips, the chaos that's coming, the one name that Ohio State fans keep asking about and keep wanting to know about is Caleb Downs. And again, similar to Damon Wilson and Keeley, it's like, I feel bad in some ways because I don't want to just offer up lip service and say, oh, well, this could still happen. We don't know. Like the same exact message has been the same exact message for the last 6 weeks. Like the conversation is very ongoing. Ohio State feels confident that Caleb Downs wants to visit and come see the Michigan game, but they're not sure if he will. And obviously in the last few days, we saw quotes around, the Alabama world from his father saying that their plan is to be at the Alabama Auburn game on November 26th. But Andrew, like if you read those quotes, there's always like a little bit of an out, like a little bit of an out, like right now that's the plan. If something changes, we'll let you know. How do you read that?
I mean, I read them just like I read most quotes from teenagers or parents of teenagers. And that's, like if you're an Alabama commit and an Alabama writer is going to interview you and ask you about your plans or whatever, even if he were planning on visiting Ohio State that weekend, I don't know if they would just come out and even tell the writer that part. But I think we've been saying it all along. Does he make it up for Columbus for that game, or does he go to the Iron Bowl? And if he does visit the Iron Bowl, that's, obviously that's good for Alabama. I don't know what his football schedule's like into December, or, hell, could he show up in Columbus this weekend? Who knows? Probably not, but
it's at least plausible.
Yeah. It's possible. He was just in Georgia, and I think I saw he was in the Georgia locker room after the game and everything too. So I feel like we would both probably agree that if he's going to flip to a school, it's probably going to be Ohio State, not Georgia. At least it kind of seems that way still if it happens. But does he show up in Columbus? That's the $1 million question here. And that's going to be the question all the way up until he signs in presumably December.
Yeah. And I think that there is value in the fact that he went and visited Georgia for their game against Tennessee. Sure, it's only a 25-minute, 30-minute drive to get there. I'm sure that's a part of it. But it does at least signal the fact that he is willing to go see a good football game. And if that is the barometer you're looking at for whether or not a kid is at least having some willingness to consider another option, then it's there. It has very little to do with whether or not logistically he actually gets to Ohio State in the next 2 weeks, or next 3 weeks, but it does at least offer up some reason to be encouraged because he's showing a willingness to go see somewhere else. So it's just one of those things. I don't believe we will know for sure about a visit, whether it's this weekend for the Indiana game or 2 weekends from now against Michigan or 4 weekends from now when it's, the week after the Big Ten championship game and Ohio State hosts a few official visitors then. I don't think we'll know for sure until the day before or the day of a visit if it happens. So it's not something where Caleb Downs is going to be on Twitter in promoting this big idea that, hey, I'm going to Ohio State this weekend. He's already taken his official visit. It's not a situation where he's going to have a big graphic prepared for him, like welcome to Columbus, or, the airplane shot through the window and the horseshoe underneath and the sunny skies and blue, clouds. None of that stuff's going to happen. It's going to be a kid and his dad getting in the car or driving to the airport, making a quick trip, seeing if it's worth it for him.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to know that the conversations with Perry Eliano have been ongoing ever since that Alabama commitment. But I mean, there's no reason for optimism unless he does show up in Columbus. That's pretty much the bottom line with that. And I've seen some people ask about if Alabama's poor season will have an impact on this at all. I mean, Alabama's Alabama. They've lost 2 games. If there were to be like a coaching shakeup or something like that, I would think that could absolutely change things. Although, a lot of those coaching changes happen after the early signing period for good reason, I would say, if you're the school at least. So I don't know. Just got to get him to town. That's pretty much what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how Nick Saban may handle that because it seems like the Pete Golding era at Alabama should be coming to an end. Their defense has become a liability. I don't believe that Nick Saban is the type of man running a type of program that he's going to allow that to persist. I actually think, because it's highly unlikely that Alabama will make the playoff, that he's more likely to make a coaching change before signing day, just because you don't want to miss out on potential dudes out there when all these other schools are doing it. Obviously, if you're in the playoff, your coaches are a little bit differently focused. If Alabama's playing in, the Outback Bowl or whatever, which I don't know what the SEC's bowl affiliation, so forgive me, Peach Bowl, who knows? Citrus Bowl? Where do they play? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Point is,
Capital One Bowl? I don't know. Something.
Maybe. Isn't the Capital One the Citrus Bowl?
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it got rebranded. I can't keep up with
Capital
all these
One loves
400 bowl games. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. But the point is that I think that you could see him make that move sooner. Now, that also works into the potential discussion for Keon Keeley. We can talk about rumors and coaching changes and all that stuff because hell, we cover Ohio State. It's been used against Ohio State on the recruiting trail and for the last 6 years, every which way possible. So I don't feel entirely bad doing it, but it's also somewhat irrelevant because it's all just hypothetical. But what is not hypothetical is the fact that Ohio State may very well have been the choice for Caleb Downs back in the summer if Caleb Downs knew that the defense was going to improve. They talked to him about it. They showed him how they would improve it. But now that he's seen it, now it's theory and now it's testimony and not just theory. That is what I think continues to drive his interest in wanting to get back to Columbus to make a visit and see it in person and see how he fits in the vibe of the locker room. Again, I'm not here to make a big show about Alabama, but it does seem like there's something bad in the cupboard right now in Alabama. The culture does not quite seem to be as strong as it has always been in the last decade plus. And I don't know, maybe that's just my bias speaking. I don't know. I'm willing to acknowledge that it could be, but it just seems like something isn't right there. And when you watch them play, they don't appear to be a team that generally seems to like each other. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm reading it completely wrong, but something just doesn't seem right. And I think that's almost impossible for a recruit to not pick up on that when they're visiting.
Yeah, I mean, something absolutely seems off in Tuscaloosa. Like even the whole, not sure if you've ever heard of Eli Ricks. It's a cornerback recruit.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, heard of him. That was their big transfer along with Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously. And then I think he was held out of most of the early games. And then maybe that was just a Ricks thing and not a culture thing at the campus. Then he played one game and he looked really good. I don't know. There's just some weird stuff going on down there. And it's weird in itself that they have 2 losses, but I don't know. Something seems off.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe that could play into Ohio State's favor. Maybe it won't. I mean, Ohio State and Alabama are going to go head to head, mano a mano for a number of recruits in this cycle. They already have. Alabama's won up to this point, pretty much every one of those fights. And so now you start to wonder, the war isn't over, not to be too, grandiose about it, but the war is still ongoing. And Ohio State really is just looking for an opportunity to fire the last salvo and sneak a victory. So we'll see if they get that opportunity.
With Keeley, though, it seems like most people have presumed Alabama's been the leader for basically 2 months now, and like you said earlier, he's the kind of kid, if he knows where he's going, he's just going to end things and commit somewhere. So it almost seems like that situation, no news is good news type of thing that we've been dealing with for the last few weeks. At least that's kind of how I see it. So,
yeah, I'm willing to posit a theory, if you accept that it's just a theory, and it is this: I have continued to believe that were this entirely a decision being made 100% by Keeley, that he would commit to Ohio State. There are other factors involved, as there should be when you're a 17-year-old dealing with family, and everyone's opinion should matter. That said, my theory is that the longer he waits, the closer he gets to signing day before making a decision, the less likely it is for people in his circle to be able to be mad if he picks something that's not what they want. Does that make any sense?
So the longer it goes, it makes it like his other advisors the possibility of them accepting a school other than Alabama, it makes it more likely that they would accept that decision. Is that kind of what
it makes it more likely? It makes it so that they would have less time to be pissed off and salty about it if he went with something that was his own choice.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I can't remember if he's enrolling early or not, but yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm just that totally just my own theory. I'm just trying to figure out and what, if it's so clear cut that he's committed, that he wants to go to Alabama and that he wants to commit to Alabama and that's the favorite and that's every other team is an absolute, also ran in that battle, then why hasn't it happened yet? And maybe I'll be embarrassed when this comes out on Thursday morning and maybe he's already made that announcement. That's the thing. We just don't know what these kids are doing. But as we sit and try to read the tea leaves of why hasn't it happened yet, there's not a whole lot of other explanations. This goes back to the same thing with Jackson Carman and Blake Miller and other guys like that in Ohio. If they haven't committed to that, people all the time, well, why hasn't he committed to Ohio State yet? Because he didn't want to go there. So that's why. If he knew he wanted to go there, then he would have committed. And especially for kids like Uyangalele, like Damon Wilson, like Keeley, like Caleb Downs, these are not game players. They're not kids out there looking for attention. So when they know, they know.
I like that theory. I can get behind that.
What else you got? Anything on your mind?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I don't think we're really.
I'm telling you, man, this is the wildest cycle.
I know.
I'm sitting here.
Go ahead.
I'm sitting here every day going, Is there anything I can write about or talk about today that isn't just completely rehashing what I've written or talked about the day before? And Samson Okunlola, you're like, is he going to visit? Don't know. Is there conversation about him visiting? Yes. Will he absolutely 100% be at Ohio State for the game against Michigan? Nope. There's no guarantee. Arian Carter, the linebacker from Smyrna, Tennessee, down there near Memphis, supposed to make his official visit to Ohio State this weekend for the Indiana game. Does the Alabama issue make it easier for that to potentially happen? Is there just as likely a chance that come Thursday, Carter's going to cancel his visit to Ohio State just like he did Tennessee and Michigan? Maybe. Like, there's just, everyone, he's saying all the right things thus far, but when you're dealing with kids and the situations, this is the weirdest recruiting cycle of my time covering Ohio State football recruiting. And the Buckeyes have the 3rd ranked class in the country and are really putting together an incredible class that could be a great, like, all-time great type of class if they find a way to add Keeley, Wilson, and Caleb Downs. So it's like, I don't want to be negative about it, but I know people are like, this class is kind of boring. But right now, this class is kind of boring. But boring, trust me, folks, America, listen. You either get one of two things here over the next 5 weeks for Ohio State. You get boring or you get chaos. And I think I personally choose boring in that situation.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, there will still be some stuff going on, but we don't want to see Carnell Tate going out and taking 9 visits between now and the time he signs or anything like that. I do kind of wonder if maybe there are any guys in the class now that, I don't want to like say this like the wrong way, but maybe haven't progressed the way they thought they would. And maybe they are looking at if some other guys that are like under the radar that we're not really talking about now, those kinds of things, but there's really no way of knowing that until like a kid tweets out an offer or something like that. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm on high alert about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
You have to be, because we see it every year. But as I think that speaks to what I said earlier, like, no matter what the position, Ohio State is going to keep evaluating and keep recruiting, because you don't know. You don't know if all of a sudden you need 2 quarterbacks. You don't know if all of a sudden you need another running back. You don't know if Mark Fletcher, decides, hey, I am going to stay home, go to Miami. All of a sudden you better be recruiting somebody else. Like, recruiting is not a matter of we have a commitment, every other relationship ends. That's not how it works. It can't work that way. If you do it that way, you're setting yourself up for failure down the road. So all of these things are moving parts. Now, the question is, of course, how does what I expect to be chaos in the college football transfer portal world also in the next month, once these schools and once seasons end, people are going to have to be adjusting pretty quickly on the fly with their recruiting philosophy based on who they're expecting to lose in the transfer portal. If Ohio State does not beat Michigan and does not make the Big Ten championship and risks, not being in the playoff, attrition will happen no matter what. But if all that happens, then all of a sudden that attrition happens a month and a half earlier than it would. So like, everything is potentially in the conversation for upheaval. So like, you better be recruiting other players. Like, that cannot stop. If that stops, you are risking absolutely handicapping yourself. Yeah,
I agree. And I mean, like you said, we've been kind of focusing on the same names for 2023. I don't know if anybody in 2024 is possibly hopping on board anytime soon. Or I know Jeremiah Smith was just at Miami, which probably wasn't the best thing for Mario Cristobal, given the effort they put up against Florida State. I'm wondering,
Jeremiah,
maybe we see. Go ahead,
Jeremiah. I know you're a Twitter watcher, folks. If you're not on the Twitter machine, which if you're not, I applaud you. No one should be. It's a terrible place. But Jeremiah Smith seemingly every week is making tweets timed that are impossible not to believe are about the University of Miami and their continued lack of offense and their issues. I fully expect he will not make any college decision until next spring. He is going to take official visits. That's just the way it's going to go. As is his right, as he should. I would not be shocked if you see Garrett Stover back at Ohio Stadium this weekend for the game against Indiana. I know he went to the Notre Dame game against Clemson this past weekend. That is a 2-team race between Ohio State and Notre Dame, really, I think. I guess if you're looking for a player to make that leap soon, like who could be the next guy, I would say probably Garrett is someone I would look at in that respect. And then probably spin ahead to the Tuesday, November 24th, when Tyseer Denmark, the 4-star receiver from Philadelphia, makes his decision. He's got a handful of visits he still wants to make before he makes that decision, but I don't think he's going to be able to make them, including Ohio State. He hasn't been back in Columbus since the summer, so it's not easy for him to get over from the Philadelphia area to Columbus on these short game weekends, especially for the noon games, because it's a fairly long drive, and his team is still in the playoffs. So I think Tyseer Denmark will commit to Ohio State on the 24th, regardless of where else he gets to visit. So if you add those two, you could see a little bit of movement finally in that class after adding Ian Moore, a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's the other thing we have to watch, those playoff schedules. And I know, like Damon, not to go back to Damon Wilson, but I know they're in the playoffs, and obviously that can make things even more complicated when it comes to making a trip to a campus, especially one that's quite far away. So.
Yeah, and this is another negative for the Big Ten. I mean, these are things you have to navigate when you're recruiting in the Big Ten. If Ohio State was playing in warm weather all the time, you could have a night game on November 26th instead of having to have a 12 p.m. start. I know it's history, tradition. Who cares? None of that stuff matters when it comes to recruiting. If Ohio State and Michigan could play at night so that more big-time recruits could get there, they would, but the Big Ten doesn't allow night games after the first weekend of November. So it doesn't happen. And so when you're trying to get in guys from around the country, flying from California, flying from Florida, flying from Georgia, like you need to have more time to get those guys on campus. Ohio State gets to the stadium on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock for a noon game. You put a kid on an airplane in Miami at 7:30 a.m. He's not getting to the stadium until the Buckeyes coaches are already preparing on the field. So there's not really an opportunity to make a big impact. It's one of those things where you honestly, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent, and I apologize. Every time Ohio State wins a recruiting battle against teams like Alabama, Georgia, something, like it should be viewed in some way as like an upset, because there are so many things working in the favor of those programs that, and so very different a game being played on the recruiting trail that I don't think people can truly fathom it on a day-to-day basis. So like every time the Buckeyes win one of those battles, it should be celebrated like it's a huge deal. So I hope people do that. When you talk about guys like Brandon Ennis, when you talk about players, coming up to Ohio State, if Ohio State can win the Keon Keeley battle or the Damon Wilson battle or the Caleb Downs battle, it's a BFD. Like it is a big deal for that team. And I think, everyone just expects Ohio State to get all the best players all the time. Like the world is different right now than it ever has been in recruiting, and it's only going to get weirder. And the Big Ten is so far behind everyone else in the fact that they continue to play a game where they want so badly to be morally better that they are willing to risk success on the field. And I personally am okay with that. I think a lot of times fans have to ask themselves if that's what they want or not.
Yeah,
that's it.
I'm with you on that. I mean, if we had like 50 5-star kids within a 300-mile radius from Columbus, that'd be a whole different thing. But it's not a luxury Ryan Day and the staff are dealing with right now. So
nope. And you can't go out and see all these kids every weekend. It's not easy to travel to visit the kids you want to see. They can't just pop by your campus on a 2-hour drive. Like it is an uphill battle, and it's hard to acknowledge that or admit that, but you have to if you're going to be willing to accept reasonable results. And the fact is, Ohio State's a top 5 class in the country every year because the program is in such great shape. But that doesn't mean that the battle for these kids isn't getting harder and harder.
Right. Real quick, how does it work for if they're if obviously they win the Big Ten, they're going to go to the playoff. That's going to take away I assume that's going to take away a chunk of time that they'd have to obviously focus on recruiting. So that's a whole nother thing.
Well, what it will do, I mean, the real question is the Big Ten championship game week, because after that game against Michigan, you are back into an open contact period. And Ohio State last year was the first year in 7 years where they've been able to actually get out and recruit that week. There's only a 2-week open contact period before the dead period begins at the start of the early signing period. So they have, in the last handful of years, generally been cutting that in half because they haven't been able to get out on the road. So at that point, you just have to hope kids are willing to come up on their own. And again, hey, will you do me a favor and fly up from Florida to Ohio on December 12th, please, just for fun? Like, that's just not easy to do. What do you guys got going on that weekend in Columbus? Oh, nothing. We're going to do some practice. Students are gone. There's no football games, and it's going to be about 38 degrees. You want to come? Like, that's a difficult pitch. I mean, right. It's a little bit different than, hey, why don't you come down South Beach? We're going to put you out on a yacht for the weekend with the owner of Life Wallet. We're going to, like, it's just a different world. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you have to truly appreciate the kids that are committed to Ohio State, that want to be a part of something that's a little bit different. And hopefully people understand that and are okay with it. So that's what it is.
Yeah. Yep.
Keep on recruiting, keep on doing your best, and make sure the stuff doesn't let you doesn't drive you crazy, because it can. But Andrew, anything else for you?
Nope. I'm gonna go get a California burrito at the local Mexican restaurant. So that's what's next.
Sounds lovely. I appreciate you joining me. Everyone out there, thanks for watching. I apologize for all my rants. Sometimes not a lot of other stuff to talk about. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. Set your notifications on for the podcast so that every time myself and Andrew or Austin Ward or Bill Landis are making new content, you get it first. So thanks for watching again. We'll see you next time.